So I finished the Kingkiller Chronicles, and I have yet to compile my thoughts in my own head, much less place them all in one place in an organized fashion, because there's so many thoughts. I've never read something that I felt this way about. I'm so baffled and intrigued and in love and confused, and it's this bundle of all these emotions captured in this one set of 2 books that may or may not ever become more than these 2 books. And I have to figure out a way to give my thoughts on that in a video. And that's an undertaking, but we're going to try. I'm not completely sure how I want to format this, but the first section of this discussion is going to be spoiler-free. I'm just going to be talking about general things, about the framework of the story, about my feelings on the books itself. I'm not going to do a lot of spoilers at the beginning. I may jump into spoilers at the end. We'll see. First of all, this is a series that I've heard a lot about. It's still in like the Reddit I think it's the top 5, if not top 10 fantasy series that people are hyped about. People are constantly talking about the Kingkiller Chronicles, and it was this enigma to me. It was this big series that was on the horizon that I knew had been a long time since there had been another entry in the series. But it was this series that I always had this idea that it would be something that really resonated with me. And last time I had that gut feeling that I was going to love a series, it was the Stormlight Archive, and that's my favorite series, probably. So I really trusted my gut instinct on this one, and I wasn't completely let down, but this one hit different. And because I'm talking about the series in 2021, and I know that there has not been another entry in this series for such a long time, it made me read the book maybe slightly differently than I would have if I thought there was a sequel coming soon. And normally I don't like to read things about the author or about like the meta of the series into a story, but it becomes difficult when the story is written in such a way that it forces me to think about the meta. It forces me to like ponder things about the author. And of course, I don't know what's going on in Patrick Rothfuss's head, but I can say what I feel like he wrote on paper and how I feel like that applies to the general discussion of Kingkiller. One of the interesting things about my experience with the Kingkiller Chronicles is that I did what I normally do. I listened to the book a lot on Audible, and then I also read the ebook copy, and I would go back and forth. But a significant amount of this book I experienced through audiobook format in a setting where I was trying to get a little bit more exercise. So at the end of the day, when everything was dark, I would go out into the woods near my house, and I would walk through the woods listening to the audiobook of the Kingkiller Chronicles. And I want to say that it really probably enhanced the experience a lot. Because you're listening to this fantasy series with a beautiful, well-described world with prose that is, it's imaginative and it's artful. And experiencing that while being in nature and imagining the story in my head while being outside and seeing wildlife and being able to experience fresh air, I do think it added to the experience. And so it really did cement this series in a really concrete way that may or may not have had to do with the way that I ingested this story. Nevertheless, I cannot separate myself from the experience that I had. And the experience overall that I had was awesome. I already mentioned how beautiful the writing that Patrick Rothfuss does here is, and that's something that really clicked for me. There's this thing where you read a lot of fantasy, and some fantasy prose just feels like I don't really feel like anything that I've read has detracted from the story, but there are certain levels of prose that I feel greatly add to the gravitas of how important the series feels. Like if an author uses a certain level of prose, in my brain, it automatically comes across as feeling more important than certain other fantasy series with weaker prose. My favorite example of a series whose prose I think just greatly added to the atmosphere of the story was the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I absolutely love the way that those 3 books are written, and this gave me a little bit of those vibes. The prose style is slightly different. And that beautiful prose was used to describe a world in a way that was just very freaking effective. There are different ways that an author can use to get a lot of world building out there, and one of them is just like extraneous words. I love Sanderson, but Sanderson likes to use a lot of words to describe the magic system and every single thing about the societies that he's creating. Patrick Rothfuss was able to both show and tell to varying degrees, but when he was showing, it was powerful and it was subtle and it subliminally created a real space for this world in my head. And sometimes when it was more showy, it worked, and sometimes when it was more showy, it brought me all the way out of the story, but I'll sort of get to that later. But when I started this book, it took me a little bit of time to really click with what was going on, and there was a lot of things going on in my personal life at the time. But ultimately, the beginning of this book is sort of a prologue to what the rest of the series is going to be, which, if you aren't already aware, there is a character who is telling his life story over the course of 3 days, and presumably each of the days of him telling his life story is going to equate to one of these books. We have 2 of them. We don't have the third one, but that's the format we've been given. That's what it says in the front of the book. It says day 1. Book 2 says day 2. And the beginning of this book sort of sets us up in this tiny little town and lets us meet the main character and then set up the situation where he's going to be telling his life story. As soon as he got to the part where he started telling his life story, I stopped for a little bit. Then I came back. And once I came back, I could not put the series down until I was done. Now, when Kavoth sits down and says that he's going to tell you his life story, he does. And the format of these books cannot be separated from the fact that we don't know how the story wraps up. When you're reading a finished series and you read book 1 and book 2 of a trilogy, there are oftentimes things that don't seem relevant, or maybe you know that they're foreshadowing, and you know that at some point in the future there's going to be some reason why some of these elements that you didn't understand were brought in. Because we're dealing with an unfinished story here, and a story that's been unfinished for a very long time, I think it's impossible to read Kingkiller for the first time in 2021. It's impossible not to question the reason why some of these elements are included. And I know that when I say that, I sound like a bit of a hypocrite. If you've seen some of my videos before, I have described loving books more than other mediums because of the sheer amount of time that you can spend with a character. And whereas mediums like movies have to be very cut and specific and tight, books can be a little bit looser and they can explore more. You get to learn more about a character, and not every single detail has to be necessary. The Kingkiller Chronicles really stretched my defense of this opinion, because at times there are things happening in the story that seem so irrelevant to the greater story that it's hard to tell if you're experiencing that moment for character development or if it's supposed to be foreshadowing or why it's there at all. And I believe this is true in both book 1 and book 2. The thing is, I am the type of person that says I am okay if it's just there to explore more about this character, because every single scene that we see Kavoth in could potentially add character development to Kavoth, even if it's very minor. Not every single scene has to be this major turning point, but sometimes there are scenes that just feel so far out of left field that it's hard to know when you're reading it why it's there. There are entire sections of both books in the Kingkiller Chronicles where you are so far off the beaten path from what seems like it should be the main plot thread that even the character Kavoth sometimes forgets what he was sort of made, like, focusing on as his primary goal. One of the things that was going through my head is, like, modern day television shows, like something that might show up on Netflix, are usually like 8-episode miniseries. Sometimes it's more than one season, but it's usually like 6 to 8 episodes, maybe 10 episodes, but shorter number of episodes. And in each of those episodes, some major plot development will happen. The Kingkiller Chronicles feels a lot more like shows from the 90s. I've been watching The X-Files for the first time, and The X-Files is sort of subdivided up into every episode is generally a monster of the week type scenario, and every couple episodes there will be something that happens that is relevant to the overarching story. That's more what Kingkiller feels like. It feels like we're watching a TV show, and each episode sometimes is filler for the whole series. I mean, it's character development for the series, but major plot points happen sometimes few and far between. And sometimes I'm completely down with that. And sometimes I'm so confused at how this book was published. And now we can talk about this, because I am I'm genuinely, I would love to know what happened. Because generally speaking, because in my understanding, when an author is pitching a series to get published, they generally have the first book done, and then they have an outline for what's going to happen in the rest of the series. And a publisher will look at that first book and the plans for the series, and they will make the decision to publish or not publish a series based on the original work and where they think it's going. I cannot fathom a world, and we may be living in this world, and it's just I am a denier. I cannot fathom a world where the 2 books that Patrick Rothfuss wrote were outlined in that original plan. Now, this is all speculation on my part, completely. This is just me spitballing based on what I read. But there is so much seeming meandering that goes on that in my brain, they looked at the first book and they looked at Patrick Rothfuss's outline and they okayed him. The first book, at some point, gained a lot of hype and did extremely well, and he went to write the second book. And in whatever Patrick Rothfuss's writing process is, I've seen interviews where he talks about how much of his original plan for the second book changed and how that eventually would change what the third book was supposed to be, potentially leading to all of the things, there's a cornucopia of things that caused the delay for book 3. But one of those things seems to be the fact that he changed the story significantly. Because having read book 2, and seen the places that he goes, the fact that he chooses to bring up a lot more questions while answering very few, and the fact that he chooses to go in the wild, random directions that he does in book 2, and I say random because they really do feel random. It just makes me wonder what the heck he said book 2 was going to be, what the heck he said book 3 was going to be, and just how far he has veered off the course and was allowed to veer off the course because the book did well. I have no idea. That's all speculation. Let's go back to the part where I said this book felt random. In most books, you can feel the author's hand. You can feel it in the pacing. You can feel it in the plot points that happen. You can see, I'm about halfway through this book, something major is going to happen. I'm about 70% through this book, the final climax is going to appear. And generally speaking, you can judge some things that are foreshadowing. You can judge some of the directions that you're going. And the author can sometimes use that presumption to throw in twists and whatnot. In the Kingkiller Chronicles, the author's voice, because of his prose, is all over the place. But in other ways, it feels like no one is writing the book at all. Because you feel like you are genuinely following the course of someone's life. And the real truth about most people's lives is that they don't follow a traditional narrative structure. Weird things happen, and you may have plans, but things come and divert them. And that's the way the book feels. It feels like you are going one direction and things happen and stuff just doesn't get resolved, or directions change, or weird crap happens in your real life. And sometimes it has no reason, or it feels like it has no reason, and life keeps going on. That's how these books feel. In a book like The Lord of the Rings, you're given a premise at the beginning of the book. There's this ring, and it needs to be destroyed. And throughout the books, different things happen, and the world is explored more, and more plots are brought in. But you can follow, here's where we're going. In the Kingkiller Chronicles, there is no destination, so it's all about the journey. The only thing you know about the destination is that the character goes from wherever you are at the story to eventually becoming the person that he is when he's telling the story. That is the only destination that you have to go for. And because of that, Rothfuss just goes. He just goes places. And none of them are really foreseeable. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them are confusing. Some of them last so long. Sometimes you are dealing with what feels like a side quest so long that you enter another side quest of a side quest. But then you realize there is no main quest. So you're wondering if the side quest of a side quest is the main quest. And sometimes it is. And sometimes it's not. But the whole time I'm engaged because I care about Kvothe, but sometimes I'm confused because I'm wondering why Kvothe is in the situation that he's in. There are large swaths of book 2 where I'm just confused because I'll be reading a section and be like, how the heck did we get here? And where are we going? And it's weird to feel that way when you're reading a book that's so highly regarded, it's just confusing. And generally, knowledge of having read lots of fantasy series tells me that all this stuff is here for a reason. Some of it you can see, but a lot of it you can't. And it leads the reader to wonder, where are we going, and how can book 3 make this section relevant? The entire climax for the first book, The Name of the Wind, is so out there and random and not... it's foreshadowed in the most backwards and not normal way possible, to a point where it's not really it's just, we enter this quest and it's like, this is the climax of the book. I don't understand. And all of these things that I'm saying, they don't make any sense, because sometimes the book seems to not make any sense, but this has sounded negative. So I want to get around to the fact that I was deeply engaged in Kvothe's story and his life and the lives of the characters around him in a way that is almost unparalleled recently. The way that Rothfuss is able to use these random meandering elements to explore the world, to get you to care about Kvothe, to get you to be invested in the deeper mysteries of the series. Because there are deeper mysteries of the series. There are things that present Kvothe tells you about. There are things that crop up in the story. There are important elements of the story that feel like they should be the main quest, that sometimes Kvothe even seems to forget about, that are so fascinating. They bring me back to my childhood whimsy. And the fact that it's this weird oxymoron of a situation, because the fact that they are so infrequently addressed makes them more mysterious and makes the times when they are addressed more important. The fact that there's so little information about this really cool, magical, fantastical, wild and dark lore inside this series. The fact that these things exist makes them more ominous and more important sounding. But the fact that you interact with them so infrequently helps the story, because it helps the story because it adds to that effect. But because we know that those are the main parts of the story and we don't have a completed story, the places that we go, instead of exploring the questions we want answered, sometimes it's just a weird choice. And I want to know how this book got published. And part of me wants to understand, how is this book so highly regarded? While the other part of me is like, I absolutely understand why this is an amazing series, because Rothfuss does some amazing work here. He gets me to care about these questions. He gets me to care about the character of Kvothe. He gets me to care about what happens with these weird characters. He introduces side characters that I love. I want to know what the frick is happening with present-day Kvothe. I need to know how he got from point A to point B. I want to know why the series is called the Kingkiller Chronicles. I want to know all these things. I'm invested in this TV series that gives me so little A plot thread and gives me so much B plot thread, and I can explore this world, and I felt like I was in this world, and the whole time I'm reading book 1 and book 2, I'm so invested in this. I'm walking through the woods, and I live in Kvothe's story. I'm living in his head. I'm feeling things. I got these guttural emotions. I laugh. There's so much humor. I cry. There's so much sadness. There's so much beauty. There's so much confusion because there's so much random. And it's so good, but it's so confusing because there are parts that genuinely baffle me on why they exist at all. And some of them I can come up with reasons for, and some of them I can't, because the Kingkiller Chronicles is the weirdest freaking series that I've read, and I am more conflicted on it than I've ever been about anything that I've potentially ever read, ever, because I love it, but I don't understand it, and I don't know if it's possible to wrap up in a single book. And my brain just goes, well, then publish more books, Rothfuss. But Rothfuss is having trouble publishing this book. And there's been drama with him and his publisher. There's been things going on in his life. There's been a lot of stress caused by the popularity of the series. We didn't necessarily expect it. I don't understand how the series is so popular sometimes, because I love it. But sometimes I'm reading and I'm like, how is this so highly regarded? But also I get it. What is wrong with me? There are moments when I am reading these books that I am so, they affect me emotionally so strongly. There are moments where I'm reading these books and I just get pulled all the way out. I'm like, what are we doing? I would love to talk to Patrick Rothfuss someday and just pick his brain. And I don't know if because of the way that I'm talking about this book that would ever happen, but I'm so fascinated by this series in a way that I can't describe. And I loved it so much, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm the guy that defends books having super long parts that are not necessarily understandable. But this book, it tries that. It tries that so hard. This book feels like a TV show that was written with filler episodes, but the filler episodes presumably might be super important because they mention something specific, and I don't know. I watched Jay's videos from Captured in Words, and I am so freaking on the edge of my seat, invested in all of these mysteries that he spends time fleshing out and making theories on, and I love it. Some of them I've come up with my own. Some of them he helps me understand parts that I might have missed. Some of the elements of this book give me extremely strong, like, Voyage of the Dawn Treader vibes, where something so massively consequential or important exists in this world, and we get a glimpse of it. And it affects the story in majorly strong ways that affect the way that we perceive the entirety of the story. And Rothfuss does the thing where he just gives you a little pinch of it, which is, it's brilliant. And it gets me so hooked for every little piece of this knowledge that I want that I get confused. I get confused by some of the side points because I don't know where we're going because the books aren't done. And because the books aren't done, I don't know if it was random or if it was important because it feels random, but it might be important. So do I have to care? Or can I criticize those parts? Or can I love the fact that it feels like I'm just following a dude through life and it seems to just be random and meandering? Or do I complain about it because sometimes it draws me out of the story and I'm like, what the frick are we doing? This video is the most wild, nonsensical thing I've ever made. It's already so long, so I'm not going to do a spoiler section. But if you want me to do a spoiler section, please like this video, and please comment down below that you would like to hear my spoilery thoughts on the Kingkiller Chronicles about specific parts individually. If you would like to hear me do a spoilery video for the Kingkiller Chronicles instead of spewing my general thoughts, please let me know in the comments down below. Please subscribe to this video if you'd like to see more videos that I will post. If you'd like to talk about this subject with me in Discord, there's a Discord down below where everybody can join and we can talk about Kingkiller. We can talk about anything that we want to because it's our space and no one can stop us. Now I'm freaking worked up and I'm super hype and I have nothing to do with the hype except edit this video with fervor. This video is going to be edited with at least 50% more gusto than usual. I don't know if it's going to make any sense, but thank you for watching. If you read the Kingkiller Chronicles, please let me know if you identify with any of the things that I said in this video, or if you think I'm just a lunatic. Until next time, I'm not your dad, but I am your best friend. Bye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.